action. And as you just heard, I'm sure the meeting's going to be recorded because a number of people asked if they couldn't come tonight, if they could watch it later. So we're going to be making that available. Very glad to welcome you to this evening's webinar on nonviolence, the most effective path to peace. And the subtitle there is Rethinking Power Conflict and How Peace is Built. Um, this is a topic that's of great interest to me, but I think should be to all of us too. And partly, I think it's the challenge we face is that people have stereotypes of what nonviolence is about. And I think it's important that we dig more deeply to try to understand it better. A lot of people think that it means just, laying down and let anybody walk over you, all over you, or that it's some idealistic fantasy that people can deal with conflict that through nonviolence. And so the world has a strong bent toward power over. And nonviolence is really a very different approach to peacemaking. So I just want to sort of give that backdrop as to why I'm very excited about the what we're having tonight. So with that, let me turn the microphone over to our presenter, Sam Chawla-Rios, who's a certified nonviolence trainer. And so, Sam, take it away. Sam, before you go, I forgot to say, please, during the presentation, you can type out your questions. You don't have to wait till the end. Type them out, but send them to me in the chat box. Send them to me, and then at the end, I'll go through those questions and ask as many of them as I can. So with that, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Thank you. And it's lovely to have you all here. I'm really excited to be diving into this topic that is my favorite topic in the world. It's really, it gets me excited, and I'm excited to see you all here, eager to learn as well. Before we dive in, I do want to invite everybody to just take a moment, because I know we've probably all had a long day. I'll invite us to kind of just take a deep breath in and a long, slow exhale out. Let's do that one more time. Big, deep breath in, long, slow exhale out. And the invitation here is to be grounded and present as we kind of delve into a topic that can have a lot of complexities about it. It can bring up a lot of emotions. But for the here and now, I'm inviting everybody to be grounded, feel your toes on the ground, and I'll get us started with a centering quote as well. And this one is from Bayard Rustin. He says, "What is needed is the realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic." That's Bayard Rustin, kind of sets the tone for today. For those of you that don't know, it's Bayard Rustin's birthday today, so that was why I chose him here for our opening quote. I do like to get a little bit of an understanding of who's in the room and where you're kind of landing currently. So I'm going to put up a question on the screen, and I'm going to ask that you respond in the chat box with the number that corresponds to your answer. And here's the question, rather simple. Is peace possible? I have a scale of 1 through 5, 1 being no way, 5 being definitely. Let's take a few minutes to think on that. There's no right or wrong answer. Just trying to gauge who's in the room, that's all. I'm seeing a good variety so far. Very good. So it looks like we're not in any extremes. We're kind of somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, which is great. Um, yeah, I even got a comment that it kind of depends on where. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that little bit of introspection. I guess I'll share my number with you a little bit later. Before we get going, I do want to formally introduce myself, and I like to do this by sharing a few photos, collage of little bits and pieces of my life. And these are all rather recent photos, I think all within 2-ish years, maybe 3. Yeah, I guess it's 3 years now. But yes, just to formally introduce myself, my name is Sam. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a community organizer, a nonviolence advocate and trainer, and a peace and justice activist. I'm an engineer by degree, but a few years back, I chose to leave corporate to devote my life to this journey, a lifelong journey of activism and nonviolence work. Um, and I like to say to people that I like now use my problem-solving engineering brain to help address the pressing social issues of today. I've been heavily involved in like a lot of grassroots activism, from environmental justice to utility justice, water justice, anti-war groups. And I've organized and been to countless demonstrations, vigils, civil disobedience actions. Um, I really do enjoy training everyday people to be safe and prepared at demonstrations. And over the past year or so, it's been a lot of doing that. And I also help to establish peacekeeping teams all around New Jersey to make sure that our New Jersey resistance stays strong. Um, I'm also a co-founder of Modern Peacenik, which is a project that currently is working to inspire and empower a new generation of change makers through these principles of nonviolence. My formal training certifications come from the University of Rhode Island and Pace Bene Nonviolence Service. I realize I didn't explain any of these pictures, but if you look at the top left, that's my beautiful wife there. We got married in Phoenix, Arizona a few years back. We have 2 crazy cats, and those other pictures are kind of just me out in the community and in action. I also do want to mention that I recognize that I follow in the footsteps of many wonderful activists, teachers, trainers, and philosophers. And a few of my biggest inspirations are mentioned here. This is definitely not an intensive list. You may see some names here that are familiar to you, maybe some names that you may be curious about. Um, but for today's presentation, a lot of the research thoughts and philosophies that I've kind of collected together come from these main people here. Have Jean Sharp, Erica Chenoweth, Maria Stephan, Dr. King, Kazu Haga, Adrienne Marie Brown, Johann Galtung, and Marshall Rosenberg. All right, so I I want to start with a story slash analogy. I ran into this issue a few weeks ago. I was out doing errands, and this may be familiar to some of you, but that tire pressure light goes on, and I step out of the car to see what it was, and I find this nail inside of the car. I'm outside of the house, so I still have to get back home. So I figure that I have a few options here. One, I can carry on as usual, kind of just ignore that light, keep driving and hope that I get home. But likely that wouldn't be very safe, and a flat is essentially inevitable at that point, right? It's just a matter of time. Option number two, I could swap it out for a donut. So my car has like one of those fake spare tires. It's not an actual tire replacement. It's one of those skinny little donuts that has limitations, right? Like I can't drive it more than 50 miles per hour, and it has a maximum of like 60 miles on it. So it's clear that this is not a sustainable long-term replacement for that tire. My last option here is to buy a new tire. But of course, in the moment, right, I meant the parking lot. I can't have a tire delivered to me instantaneously. So my next best option is to put this donut on. So I get home, I call up the tire shop to order the new tire, and I find out that it's not in stock, right? I have to wait 10 days for the tire to show up. Now, my question is, how silly would it be if I just threw my hands up in the air and said, "Oh my God, 10 days, it's going to be too long. I'm not going to place this order. I'll just keep the donut on my car and I'll be fine." That's just a ridiculous scenario, right? Of course, I'm going to place the order. Of course, I'm going to take the steps that I need to do to make sure that this new tire comes as fast as possible. So I share this story because I do find like parallels between the tire and the current state of society. Um, I think I think we can, I think we all know and understand that we live in a society that is essentially punctured by violence. And to continue this way is unsustainable. A flat is inevitable, right? So we have to look at options two and three here. A quick, temporary type of fix, but also a long-term solution. And what I want to kind of pose is that nonviolence kind of covers both two and three. A short term kind of stopping of any injustice that we're seeing, but also nonviolence is about building a long-term replacement for a current unjust society, if that makes sense. So I want us to kind of like take that framework with us as we kind of explore some of these ideas. Just to give you an idea of what we're going through today. So the field of nonviolence is actually extremely vast. It's like it's essentially a whole subject in and of itself, like the subject of physics, let's say. So today we're just going to be going over some concepts and ideas of nonviolence, just giving a brief introduction, and we'll be scratching the surface, but we'll also get deep enough to kind of realize that this is actually a really important and even critical subject that we need to be studying. I'm hoping that we can keep the chat a little bit lively because it seems to be hopping right now. Uh, and if you do have questions along the way, like Bob said, you can just send him a message via chat. And I'm hoping to have some time for Q&A at the towards the end of our session today. We are aiming to finish at 8:30. We're going to start by first defining a few terms. First off, what is peace? What is violence? We're going to look a little bit at what the nature of power is, and then start delving into what nonviolent action is. We're going to look at the research and the evidence behind nonviolent action as well. Then we'll get to talk about what is nonviolence. We're going to touch on just a few of the principles of nonviolence as well. And we're going to look at how peace is built, right? And how does nonviolence play into that? And then I also do want to talk a little bit about like the future of nonviolence and where it's trending and moving towards. And like I said, we'll have Q&A. All right, so the most effective path to peace. I wonder if we could get some chat action again. My question would be like, what comes to mind when you hear the word peace? Maybe like a word or phrase or a question that pops up. What comes to mind when you hear the word peace? Give us a few minutes to think on that. I see here in the chat, no guns, no bombs, relaxation. Rodney King, can't we all just get along? The presence of care, freedom, failed so often, harmony. Yeah, exhale. So I want to start by kind of exploring peace through this lens of Johann Galtung's work as well as MLK's philosophy. Both of these philosophers kind of have divided peace into these two categories. The first being negative peace. Uh, Negative peace is defined as the absence of direct violence. It's curative. It's peace not always by peaceful means, and it chooses order over justice. So negative peace is kind of like this settling for a more like surface level calm, where underneath there's still a lot of injustice, tension, systemic oppression that is happening. Um, Dr. King actually, in his a sermon called "When Peace Becomes Obnoxious," he says that peace that maintains injustice is undesirable. Peace that maintains injustice is undesirable. And there he's talking about this idea of negative peace, right? And what you'll kind of put together is that this is often the peace that politicians talk about, right? Peace through force, order over justice. Now, on the opposite side, we have positive peace. In Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, he says that this peace is the presence of justice. This peace is preventative rather than curative. It's peace by peaceful means. And this leads to a stable and sustainable peace. So when we have a title that says nonviolence, the most effective path to peace, I'm talking about positive peace. That's the peace that I feel is worth working for and dedicating my life to. All right. Now we have to define violence. Now, the reason I do this is because in order for us to fully understand the complexity of nonviolence, we do have to kind of analyze and talk about the complexity of violence itself. Um, I wonder, do any words come to mind when you hear the word violence? You can drop that in the chat. What words come to mind when you hear the word violence? Yeah, in the chat here, I see oppression, disrespect for self and others, destruction, dictatorship. Yeah. Yeah, I want to offer some more like formal definitions. I have harming another person or yourself here as well, I see in the chat. So some more like formal definitions just so we can align before we move forward. Violence is any physical, emotional, verbal, institutional, structural, or spiritual behavior, attitude, policy, or condition that disrespects, diminishes, dominates, dehumanizes, or destroys ourselves, our fellow beings, or our world. It's a little long-winded, but kind of all-encompassing as well. Another definition, violence crosses boundaries without permission, disrupts authentic relationships, and separates us from other beings. MLK says, in spite of temporary victories, violence never brings permanent peace. Another one of my favorite definitions of violence is it's the tragic expression of unmet needs. And this comes from Marshall Rosenberg, who was kind of a pioneer in nonviolent communication. Violence is the tragic expression of unmet needs. And I have this little graphic here too to explain that as well. We see the need here on the bottom that is unmet. That becomes a problem if it continues to be unmet. And when that problem goes unsolved, it'll eventually lead to conflict. If that conflict is unreconciled, that will lead to violence or a crisis. I want to zoom in a little bit here on this word conflict because I do want to kind of dig into what conflict actually can be reframed towards. For the longest time, I always felt that conflict was something I needed to avoid. And I think I'm still working on it kind of in interpersonal situations. I tend to be more conflict avoidant, but nonviolence is not about avoiding conflict. It is about addressing that conflict head on. It's important to recognize actually that conflict is just part of the human experience. And in and of itself, conflict is neither positive or negative. I want to point this out because I think in this escalation ladder here, it makes it seem like it's a negative thing, but conflict actually, um, it's more of the evidence that the status quo is no longer acceptable. Um, Conflict is necessary for progress towards peace. And I put necessary here, emphasizing that um, we're not going to progress without reaching that point of conflict. So it's actually helpful to view conflict as more of an opportunity, even as a friend. Um, some can even view it as a gift if it's handled correctly, right? Um, Often, even in relationships, conflict can deepen and strengthen relationships when they're properly worked out. There's another quote that I really like. Conflict is the spirit of a relationship asking itself to deepen. Um, and I keep that in mind even just with like, me and my wife when I'm trying to be conflict avoidant, and then I remind myself that I have to face it head on. Conflict is necessary for progress towards peace. Violence is not. Just to zoom out back to this kind of escalation ladder, when the conflict gets unreconciled, right? So that's the issue. The issue is not conflict itself, right? Conflict is neutral, but if it goes unreconciled, um, and I use the term unreconciled, not unresolved, Because a resolution sometimes can just be like, okay, we maybe stopped the tension. We found a solution that maybe both parties are okay with. They're like, okay, fine, more of like a compromise type of situation. Um, Whereas a reconciliation, the idea of reconciling is actually for both parties, or all parties to really fully understand each other, fully understand all the needs that are present in that situation. And then in that way, they can come to a solution. So conflict that is unreconciled is what leads to violence. And one last little diagram here about violence. Um, this one comes from Johann Galtung. I think it's just called Galtung's triangle. And we actually see three different types of violence represented in this image. At the top, we have direct violence. Actually, I like to picture this more of as an iceberg. If we see that wavy line, think of that as the water level. And the top of that is what is visible. And the bottom of that is what tends to be more invisible in society. So at the top, we see more direct violence, right? So that's self-explanatory, like somebody beating their wife, bullying in schools, or soldiers going to battle. Um, that type of violence, even verbal abuse and battery fall under this category of direct violence. But the interesting thing here is that this direct violence is actually supported by two other types of violence that are actually even more pervasive. And these are structural violence and cultural violence. Structural violence, we can think of that as the violence that's like built into our systems, our social, political, economic systems. And um, this can look like the different allocation of goods and resources and opportunities to different people, right? To different groups, different genders, different nationalities. Um, so here we have example of poverty and corruption. I'm wondering if we can think of any other examples of what structural violence would be. And if you have any ideas, you can drop them in the chat. Prisons, yeah. Hmm. Food insecurity, lack of health care, yeah. Asserting power over others, unlivable wages, yeah. Suppressing education, exactly. Yeah, these are all forms of structural violence. Yeah, criminal justice. When we look at cultural violence, these are like aspects of culture that give legitimacy to make violence seem like it's acceptable almost. So these are kind of like beliefs and values or ways of being um, that really make it seem like, oh yeah, of course we would respond violently. So this, I think, kind of looks like, I guess the big one here is like patriarchy, that type of cultural framework um, kind of lays the groundwork for a lot of gender violence. Cultural violence often like supports like a sense of superiority, uh, and often also dehumanization of like other cultures. I think some other examples here of cultural violence, like white supremacy, racism, yep, religious extremism, yep, gender roles, yeah. All right, so that's all this like violent stuff. I'm gonna shake it all off now, and we're gonna talk a little bit about power. Um, so the this kind of like theory of power is coming from a lot of Gene Sharp's work, and I would highly suggest reading some of his work if you're interested. But essentially, Gene Sharp's he's written like millions of pages, maybe thousands of pages on power and nonviolence. I've boiled it down here to like one slide. So again, not all encompassing, but it gives us an idea of what he's trying to get at here. This is a not my favorite definition of power, but it's how Gene Sharp describes it. Power is the totality of means, influences, and pressure available to achieve a power holder's objective. And he has a consent theory of power, essentially saying that all power requires obedience and cooperation. Okay. I think it's easy for us to think of power as kind of like this top-down thing. But Gene Sharp is kind of opening our eyes to, hey, actually we're giving people power by obeying and cooperating. Power is only held as long as people obey. When we talk about nonviolent action, this is a mechanism that brings about change by cutting off the sources of power. Sources of power here, again, they're all given by society. This Gene Sharp kind of boils it down to authority, um, human resources, the number of people who obey and support whoever's in charge, skills and knowledge, which is like the resources that we provide that are provided by supporters. There are intangible factors as well, like habits and psychology and beliefs. Another source of power is material resources, or like control over finances and property and resources. And then there's also sanctions, which Gene Sharp talks about that being like the ability to enforce obedience. Um, and that itself depends on like these other sources. But that's kind of like a big picture, zoomed out um, model of how Gene Sharp is looking at power. And some of you may have seen kind of a diagram that looks like this, where essentially at this top triangle, think of that as the top structure. We can think of that as those decision makers, the people in charge, and they're being upheld by. This has six pillars. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. But here we have business, labor, faith, education, civil service, military, and police. And each of these pillars, right, is comprised of people, right? People that are supporting that institution. And all of these institutions will only exist if people consent to them, right? So Gene Sharp is saying if we remove our consent and we remove our cooperation from any of these pillars or many of these pillars, then the top structure, that power structure has to crumble. They have nothing to stand on. And that is really what nonviolent action specifically tries to do. Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan wrote this great book on the research that they did on um, nonviolent resistance. So it's called Why Civil Resistance Works. I highly suggest it. I think Erica Chenoweth also has a TED Talk that has, I think, been doing some circles lately as well. A very concise representation of her research. But essentially, the research that Erica and Maria did, I boiled it down to some of the main takeaways here, which are that campaigns of nonviolent civil resistance are two times more successful than violent ones, right? That's a big shocker, and it was a big shocker to Erica too when you hear her tell the story of when she was putting all her research together. Yeah, two times more successful. I think I forgot to mention, essentially, they studied all movements, both violent and nonviolent, from 1900 to 2006. So about 106 years of movements all around the world, not just in the US. And after studying all that, that's how they came to these conclusions that Nonviolent civil resistance is 2 times as successful. It's more inclusive, right? There's a wider variety of age and race, gender, ability. Um, if you think about it, like a violent campaign would require us to like know how to use weapons and be physically able to go out and fight, right? So that one definitely makes a lot of sense to me. Uh, and of course, because of that inclusivity, it means that these campaigns typically have 4 times more participation than a violent resistance campaign. When there's that many people involved, there's more visibility. And this kind of then starts a spiral of if there's more people doing something, then that lowers the risk threshold for those of us that are more risk averse, right? Think of if you're going to a protest down the street and there's only 5 people there, are you going to join that? Or would you be more inclined to join a protest that has 500 people, right? So this kind of starts this like snowball effect of nonviolent action. And what Erica and Maria really boiled it down to was that this is really a numbers game, and that nonviolent resistance has always been successful when 3.5% of the population is actively involved in consistent and strategic resistance. That is the number that they kind of boiled it down to, 3.5% of country's population, which is a lot lower than I think is intuitive. I think most people think, oh, we need like 50% of people to agree and that will kind of tip the scales. But essentially, what this is saying is that when there's 3.5% that is actively and consistently involved, think of that as like another tip of the iceberg. Those are the ones that are out there and being consistent, but there's also a lot of people below them that agree with that stance. So this 3.5 is the tip of the iceberg. It probably does mean that more than half of the population is kind of in line with the goals of that campaign. Yeah. Yes, and I saw the number in the chat. For the US, I think it's about 12 million, 11, 12 million that we have to reach for that. Um, but Erica and Maria have also stated that this is not like a prescriptive number. This is just based on the research that they did from 1900 to 2006. I'll probably touch on this a little bit later in our presentation today as well, that that number has shifted just slightly as the years have gone by. I do want to kind of tell just a few stories of nonviolent resistance that has worked and it has been really inspiring. I'm not sure if you have heard of the Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace. Um, there is a documentary called Pray the Devil Away. I'm not sure where it's streaming, but I definitely highly recommend that. But essentially, there's a civil war that was raging in Liberia. This is in 2003, where rebel forces were fighting the current dictator, their President Charles. Um, and this woman, Lema Bui, she gathered women to pray for peace. And this was daily. There were thousands of women praying daily for peace. And they were both Christian and Muslim women that would do this on the regular in kind of in the vicinity of where President Taylor would be driving by. So eventually, um, the president wanted to have peace talks with the women, and they sat down to have these peace talks. But then the peace talks stalled, and so then the women physically sat down on the floors of the government building and they refused to let the leaders inside that building leave until they had come to an agreement. Um, and when the guards tried to arrest them, Lema, she threatened to take off all of her clothes, which in their African tradition is like this really shocking curse. So the guards, they actually backed off. when she said that. The guards backed off, and a peace agreement was reached. Um, the President Charles Taylor stepped down from power, and they had democratic elections. One of the peace activists, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, was elected the first female president of Liberia. And this is a picture here of Lema, who actually won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. Pray the devil back to hell. Yes, that's the name of the. Thank you, Jen. So I highly recommend that. It is a heavy watch, but definitely worth it. Another great example of nonviolence in action is the People Power Revolution of 1986. This one's a little bit more commonly known. This is with like the dictator Ferdinand Marcos, who at the time, so this is mid 80s, he assassinated his political rival, Aquino. He banned media coverage of this, and this kind of like set off like weeks of mass protests. And then by 1986, Marcos was basically forced to hold an election. Um, Aquino's widow, Corazon, ended up winning that election. But Marcos falsely declared that he had won the election. But everybody knew it was a lie. They actually had like 20,000 or so poll workers to verify that the results were correct. So they knew that he was lying. And as a result, they had 50 Congress members that walked out in protest. Marcos had a bunch of businesses that ended up being boycotted. There were bishops of the Catholic Church that condemned him publicly. And most importantly, too, a general strike was held. So nobody went to work or to school. Um, there was even a point where like there was a military faction that was supporting Corazon, and they were with her, and they're like, let's take control of this in a violent fashion, and she shut that down, insisting that they kept everything democratic. Um, Basically, the military, Marcos sent troops to massacre the rebels. But when this happened, um, nuns ended up kneeling down in front of tanks. People gave water, food, and flowers to the soldiers. Marcos then would order his soldiers to fire, but because they were treated as humans, they couldn't follow through with those orders. And again, going to like Gene Sharp's theory of like, hey, we give power to those in charge, and if we just disobey or withdraw our cooperation, they have no power. For 3 days, people were like flooding the streets, and they brought the country to a standstill. And at the end of it, Marcos had to flee the country, and Corazon was sworn into office. It's a people power movement in the Philippines. And a little bit closer to home here, we have Minneapolis just a few months ago. And I think we're all familiar with those current events and how following the murder of Renee Good, ICE was basically sent there to invade and put fear and violence into the streets. But how did the community respond? It's really inspiring, right? So there were clergy that participated in civil disobedience. I don't know if some of you saw like the singing resistance groups that have popped up, resisting with song, the power of song. There was boycotts of local corporations. There were national boycotts of or target actions with the buying the salt and returning it right away to kind of slow down movement and the targets. But really, the community in Minneapolis took care of each other, so much so that they use the word neighboring as an actual verb. And neighboring looks like mothers donating their breast milk to strangers. or family members driving more vulnerable family members' kids to school. Right? And as a result, the federal government has since started to retreat a little bit with the ICE. They're still there, but the resistance is also still very strong and very inspiring. I found this quote here too, as well, from a teacher at Metro State University um, about his experience there in Minneapolis. But one of the lessons in Minneapolis is that nonviolence taps into something much deeper than peaceful protest. It is strategically prudent and symbolically rich. Yes, most critically, though, it offers a desperately needed reminder that we can live together differently, differently even, or especially when the armed, masked men say we cannot. We can refuse their violence alongside each other with our prayers and our songs and our feet. And I think that's just such a powerful testament to the power of nonviolence. At this point, I do want to make a distinction that nonviolent action, everything that we were just talking about and the research behind that, is actually just a small part of this larger umbrella called nonviolence. Um, so what is nonviolence, right? I have a few definitions for us. Nonviolence is a force for goodness, transformation, justice, and the well-being of all that is neither violent nor passive. Bob had alluded to this earlier, that nonviolence is not a passive stance at all. It's actually very intentional action towards um, towards healing, towards justice. War Resisters League has a really cool definition here. Nonviolence is an active form of resistance to systems of privilege and domination, a philosophy for liberation, an approach to movement building, a tactic of non-cooperation, and a practice we can employ to transform the world. And the King Center says nonviolence is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. For this next slide, I found it easier to kind of just have the words on the screen to get our brain percolating as to what this vast word of nonviolence actually means. Um, so I hope you can all see this on your screens. It's kind of like a word cloud here of many things that fall under this umbrella of nonviolence. So I'll invite you to take a look at this word cloud and maybe type in the chat any of these words that maybe stick out to you, that you're curious about, um, that seem interesting, or that you really like. I'll give you a minute to take a look at all these words because it really helps to build that picture of what nonviolence is. All right, I see some words in the chat here. Reparations, yep. Equity, reparations, cultural humility, restorative justice, inclusion. Yeah, all of this falls under that same umbrella of nonviolence, respect, you know. How about we take a look at this word cloud? Similar concept here, slightly different words. These are more descriptors rather than, I think a lot of the previous ones were more of tactics. But all of these also fall under this umbrella of what nonviolence is about. Feel free to write in the chat again any words that kind of pop out at you, something that is curious, DEI, heart, connection. Equity is back, community is new, forgiveness, solidarity, awareness, care, inclusive. Yeah. Forgiveness, breath. Yeah, all of this, again, all of this is under the same umbrella of nonviolence. Um, Nonviolence also comes with principles that have been developed by different practitioners. Um, Martin Luther King, for example, had 6 principles. Gandhi has around 7 principles. There's other principles that float around here and there. Um, there has to be at least 20 total that I know of. But I'm just going to boil it down to my favorite 3. So sorry for that bias, but the first one here is respect and dignity for all people. Nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. And nonviolence seeks to win friendship, understanding, and reconciliation. So this is why we're here, right? How do we build peace? When we're talking about nonviolence, nonviolence is addressing the root causes of violence and not just managing symptoms. Um, the root causes are addressed. We can create then these circumstances in society where tragedies like war, and more direct violence no longer exist. It's kind of that the mechanism that we're talking about here. So nonviolence, again, it's the larger umbrella that includes nonviolent action, but nonviolent action is not the only thing needed in order to bring about peace, right? Nonviolence itself is a way of life, which is also another principle. Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. Um, and so we can think of this whole field of nonviolence as a more holistic approach to social and cultural change. And because it's kind of getting at those deep roots of society, that is how we can really transform what society looks like. And any peace that comes out of that will not be temporary. And it's not just temporary, like political change that we're looking to achieve, but more of like this long-lasting, stable peace. Just to take a brief look at this holistic approach of nonviolence, uh, what I mean by that is non there's kind of these like 5 pillars here of nonviolence that we can all work towards getting better at and exercising and becoming integrating into our life. So we have nonviolence towards ourselves, nonviolence towards others, nonviolence in society, nonviolence in culture, and nonviolence towards the earth. Here we have this image of somebody practicing some self-love in seems like a beautiful outdoor location as well. Um, but nonviolence towards self can, yeah, look as simple as taking time for self-care. Nonviolence towards others. This is kind of a restorative justice circle that we're looking at here. Um, this is where kind of these conflict resolution skills, also part of that no umbrella of nonviolence, conflict reconciliation skills, um, nonviolent communication. This is all about how we interact with each other, um, in relationships, in close proximity with each other. Um, there's a whole field behind that. So that's kind of where Marshall Rosenberg as well does a lot of his work. Then we have nonviolence in society. This is where nonviolent action falls under. This is actually a picture of Trenton for one of the No Kings rallies. But nonviolence in society is where uh, we really apply these principles of kind of strategic action and non-cooperation to kind of bring down an oppressive system. Then we also have nonviolence in culture, which is equal and very important part of kind of transforming a society. And this can look like more nonviolence in our art forms, whether that's in our music, the books we read, the books we write, poetry, movies. Unfortunately, we know that how very violent our culture is just by looking at like what the top 10 movies are and how much violence there are in those movies. So if we're talking about kind of setting and laying the groundwork down for sustainable peace, we have to consider all of these pillars of nonviolence. And then last one we have is nonviolence towards Earth. Um, again, like it's a violence for us to be separated from Earth and see ourselves as dominators of ecosystems. So when we kind of can come to that understanding and respect the Earth for what it is, that'll start to bring healing in those relationships. So all of this, it takes a lot of training. Like I said, it's a vast subject. There's a lot of training that goes behind it, and the good news is that the more we train in it, the more we will develop these skills. And I like to say I'm living proof of it. And it does take time and intention, but these are all very attainable skills. And I really do believe this is kind of like a Gandhian principle that all of us have like this little seed within us that is able to kind of really cultivate these aspects of nonviolence in our lives. So I put here just a few, it's a small slide. I couldn't put everything in, but just to name a few, training in nonviolence develops empathy, conflict reconciliation skills, nonviolent communication, intervention, compassion, de-escalation skills, hope, solidarity, strategic planning, movement discipline, allyship, community, power analysis, creativity, interconnectedness, self-care, worldview shifts, constructive programs. So again, I think I probably could have filled up more of that bubble, but there is so much that goes into uh, the training and developing and really intentionally exercising these skills within all of us. And there's a lot of learning that is available to us, and I think that's also really exciting and great news. Um, I see in the chat self-responsibility. Yeah, no. Keeping an eye on the time here. I do want to have some time for Q&A. I think we're looking good so far. Um, I want to talk a little bit about nonviolence today. Um, this is also what really excites me about nonviolence is that it is, to me, nonviolence is an art and a science. It's not like it's not a set of old texts that we have to live by, but rather this like organic development of how we respond to the current climate, the current ecosystem, political climate even, right? Um, so nonviolence actually has this legacy of changing and growing and adapting. Um, and one way I like to think of it, many movements today learned from the movements of King and Gandhi, and other like large historic movements. But King and Gandhi did not have all the information that we have available to us today. And just to name a few of those, in regards to like scientific information to help us develop our skills of nonviolence. They didn't have access to quantum physics and an understanding of that the universe is more than just like objective material. Our deeper understanding of quantum physics even allows us to recognize the truth of interdependence and interconnectedness, how consciousness is also like a fundamental influencer of our reality. That all comes from like this new quantum physics knowledge. Even developments in biology. For example, the idea that like animals exist in this like endless competition is uh is actually very oversimplified. In nature, new research has discovered that there is so much cooperation. There is empathy. There can even be like minor peacemaking in the animal kingdom. Another big thing to understand in biology is that our study of biology has allowed us to really shine a light on racism as a social construct. It's not a biological thing, right? Racism is something that has been man-made. And that is something that we can really, I think it just helps us really tap into nonviolence as like, hey, this is the truth that we're tapping into. Trauma theory has really jumped leaps and bounds in the past few decades. So even understanding our physiological responses to specific stimuli um, is incredibly important, especially when it comes to nonviolent action and like a lot of the work and training I do for safety teams, understanding how our body reacts is incredibly important and very helpful in this field. Neuroscience, even um, knowing that neuroplasticity is a thing, that we can actually intentionally change our habits and reactions, our and we can change our maybe tendencies to respond violently with help of that neuroplasticity. Another fun neuroscience nugget is the discovery of like mirror neurons in humans, and how by seeing somebody go through something um, highly emotional, our neurons automatically are connecting with that feeling in a way. Um, and that, in a way, also is the power behind nonviolent action when we're trying to bring to the surface the injustice that is happening, and our oppressors are seeing that these mirror neuron responses are like a core part of what being human is about. Epigenetics, even kind of understanding that environmental factors and other things can affect how genes are expressed. Um, Also, kind of new science. Positive psychology, kind of this idea that we can train for more like pro-social behaviors that lead to better relationships and engagement and well-being. We have fractal nature of the universe, kind of recognizing that there are patterns and properties that repeat across like different scales of the universe. I think like one of these examples is like a hurricane and then like a galaxy, like similar shapes and formations, all across nature, helps us to one of my favorite integrations of that with nonviolence is maybe something we'll get into later because it's a little bit more long-winded. Um, but yeah, even just understanding that science helps us to view nonviolence in a more creative way. And then anthropology, kind of recognizing that the Darwinian model does not account for everything in our human evolution and consciousness. There have been um, experiments that kind of prove that consciousness extends beyond the physical brain and body. Um, so all of these like new um, tidbits of scientific research were not accessible to Gandhi and King, and they worked with what they had, and they were able to do a lot with what they had. Um, the times are changing, and I think this is what is both scary but also exciting. When Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan did their research, it stopped at 2006. Um, and the way technology has progressed since 2006 has really changed the landscape of how people think and how people relate to each other. And so our response as nonviolence practitioners is to also adapt, whether that's our tactics, whether that's the way we view the world. But we also have new information and research and technologies available to us that will now inform how we tweak our nonviolent approaches to resistance or towards like community building and all those things. Um, so yeah, nonviolence is like this living, flowing subject that I'm really excited to be part of, and I'm excited to share it with you. Um, I do want to end with one last reflection question for us. So if you have, I'll give us like a minute to think through this question here. If peace is something that must be built, what skills and systems will it require from us? If peace is something that must be built, what skills and systems will it require from us? One of the beautiful things about nonviolence, too, is that it is a communal effort. And there are so many aspects of it, right? And sometimes it can be overwhelming to think, oh my God, I have to learn all of that or I have to be good at all of that. But in reality, we can focus on our specific specialties, and it's really in community that we end up building a culture that really lays the groundwork for a lasting peace. I have curiosity as the first step. Yeah, that was just my. Yeah, I see some people here in the chat responding to this question. A lot of practice and patience and listening, rearing the next generation to embrace nonviolence. Yeah. Mindfulness, nonviolent communication, dedication, commitment, resistance to othering, a willingness and ability to expand our understanding of we. That's really beautifully put, Shelley. Listen to ancestors who didn't live in this disjointed, hyper individualized world and didn't even need the science, which they intuitively learned by being in community as a way of life. Yeah, yeah. Building intergenerational community. Understanding that you can't just talk at someone and think they will come around to your way of thinking. You have to respect that everyone has a right and a reason for thinking the way they do. Give and take. Try to find common ground. Yeah. Finding common ground, I think, is also another one of these principles of nonviolence. I want to say that one's Gandhian. To work on ending wars, peace activists must communicate with people in power, like Congress. I like that you put in power in quotations. I'm also trying to do that because by saying people are in power, it is insinuating that we also don't have power, right? I'm trying to use the words like decision makers um, or people in charge. Uh, Seeing the log in our own eye. Wasn't a thorn in the eye. This is a log, Murray. Good public schools. I was a school nurse for 25 years. I tried. And I'm sure you did more than you'll ever know, Lynn. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your work. Log equals complicity. Being comfortable that people thrive in different domains, rational, emotional, spiritual, and many other dimensions. Lynn says it was a log. Just thought that recently. Thank you, Lynn. Just want to do a reset on this question. Is peace possible? If anybody reassess that, hopefully at least I didn't sway you the wrong way. Um, but it's always good to kind of recheck in and see where we're landing. Yeah. Thank you all for listening to me talk. I normally try not to talk this much, but my voice is still here, and I'm glad that you are all still here as well. I think at this point, I am happy to open up the floor to any questions. I think, Bob, you might have been um, collecting some in the chat or from the chat.
Yes, well, first let me say a big thanks to you. I think that was a very thorough overview of the question of nonviolence and what is it about. So I see now your background in systems engineering was helpful. That was partially my background as well. So thank you very much for that. And it was great, I think, to have the participation as we were going along too, mostly through the
Mm.
chat. I didn't have many questions specifically in the chat, but one that was raised was intriguing to me, which is forgiveness nonviolent?
Mm.
And this is just me sort of reading between the lines, so it may not have been pointing this direction, but I think of a battered wife. Is a battered wife uh, supposed to always keep forgiving her husband for battering her? And I think the problem is unless there is a change of behavior by the husband, to stop battering the wife, that it's really not a nonviolent expression anymore. So I thought that was an intriguing question, but certainly if you would like to comment on that. And other than that, I think there was a lot of good stuff shared. with everyone in the chat, so I don't need to repeat any of that. But that was
Yeah.
the one question that came specifically addressed to me, I think, to present to you.
hmm Yeah. I mean, is forgiveness nonviolence? I don't think it's a blanket statement. I think in the scenario that you laid out, Bob, um, what nonviolent one of another core principle of nonviolence, which didn't make it to my top three, but is that we always have to respect human dignity of ourselves as well.
Mhm.
And so when we're talking about um, kind of subjecting ourselves to abuse, that would not be nonviolence. Like the nonviolent thing to do there would be to remove ourselves from that situation if we can, right? Um, there's another principle, it's one of Dr. King's principles that talks about that we should be ready to accept suffering for the sake of the cause um, to achieve the goal. And he clearly lays out that we're not just accepting suffering as it is and to be abused. If we are accepting suffering because of a nonviolent action that we're doing, right? Because we are putting our bodies uh, in places where we are standing up to injustice, that is that I think that is a perspective where that principle is coming from, and not from a perspective of being in a place where we're putting ourselves in an abusive situation. Um, so yeah, I think forgiveness, like you're saying, Bob, if if the oppressor is not actively looking to change or trying to change or taking steps to change, then there's no accountability. And nonviolence also really holds accountability as something that has to belong in a beloved community that we're trying to create. I hope
Great.
that answered
Uh,
it. I think
Yeah, I hope so too.
Sindhu.
Yeah, it's I think we're a small enough group. I see Eliane has her hand up. Let me try
Oh,
unmuting
perfect.
you.
hmm
Oh, I don't know. Jen, are you still on? Jen, can you help unmute Eliane? I don't
Uh,
know how to do it.
we just have Elion can unmute herself. Yep,
Okay.
she has
Looks like
just
she
done.
just did. Go ahead, Eliane.
Okay, hi. Well, I learned a concept a while back about forgiveness that I found very interesting, is that sometimes the kind of forgiveness we do is a power over kind. Like, I
Mm,
have the power to forgive you. And it doesn't show the respect that the person's action that we're forgiving, maybe they need to be really understood for the reason why they took that action. And if we really understand why they took that action, it may not be forgiveness, it may just be compassionate connection.
mm,
That's,
mm.
but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a lovely perspective too. And it goes back to kind of understanding each other and being open to hearing each other's stories and where we're coming from. I also want to, I think there was a question here from Sindhu. Why should we wait for conflict? Can't we solve it when it is a problem? Or even better, not create the need. I think talking about the escalation ladder, the ladder applicable in more systemic situations like engineering, poverty, etc. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. We shouldn't necessarily have to wait for conflict. I think conflict I think it goes back to this idea of like conflict is the evidence that the status quo is no longer acceptable, right? So oftentimes we might not recognize that there is a problem if there is no conflict. So I think in this scenario, Sindhu, like it would be the person that is the person that's experiencing the problem has to bring it up, and in that act of just bringing it up, there's going to be tension and conflict of, okay, let's figure this out, if that makes sense. Um, but I think the overall goal of what we're talking about with building a culture of nonviolence and stable, sustainable peace is that yes, we are actually laying the groundwork, right, for um, like the we're laying the seeds for a new type of system that is based on justice to kind of take root. So yeah, a system where there is no poverty, a system where there is no racism. That is very much the work of nonviolence. And then by doing that, yeah, we won't find ourselves in times like this where countries have to go to war because that's the only thing that they know how to do. Um, and I think it very much is possible to have a culture where people have enough information to know that there are other ways to kind of solve issues.
Yes. I also wanted to kind of give an example from my own life experience of dealing with anger management issues. And I think that can be a growth area for nonviolence. It has been in my life because, I would feel either not understood or disrespected by another family member. And then I would go storm out of the house and walk and then come back and I would have calmed down by then, but we didn't really talk through the problem. And so the problem would keep recurring. And so it wasn't until I said, well, I need to understand what the other person's perspective is. We need to kind of talk this through, essentially. And so kind of going that extra mile to say, that was really key to me to start to get a handle on this, on my own anger management problem. I had to own it, in other words, as my problem, but then also look toward a dialogical approach to work it through. And now it's pretty much been resolved. But I was kept running into dead ends, until I was willing to go that next step of seeking mutual understanding.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Bob. It reminds me a lot of the concepts of nonviolent communication,
Yes.
really understanding the other. And for those that aren't familiar with, I would also highly recommend Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication. Uh, that was for me one of my introductory on-ramps into this whole field of nonviolence was that book. Because I think similar to you, Bob, I was recognizing that I didn't know how to handle interpersonal conflict well. And I wanted to be the best partner I can be. So I'm like, let me read this book and see what this is about. Um, so read it at your own risk. Next thing you know, you'll be. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're down to our last 5 minutes. Does anybody else have a final question? I think there's a hand raising function if you do. Otherwise, I think that we're close enough to the end time, we could just wrap it up if nobody else has another question. All right, well, let's express our thanks to Sam. I thought that was an excellent presentation. Very thorough,
No, thank
very
you.
thorough.
I want to say thank you as well for listening, everyone. And I think we will be following up with an email that will have some resources and even like a feedback form. I would love to hear your feedback and your thoughts on it as well. Thank you so much.
All right. Great to see everybody. Have a good rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll continue this journey together. So let's stay in touch.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Bob.
Sure.
Thanks,
Good
everyone, for
night,
being here.
everybody.
No,
Thanks for
Good night.
coming.